I'm practicing saying hello once at the beginning of this podcast. I don't know. It feels awkward and weird, but we're doing something different because it's always good to switch it up. So, hello, everybody. Shoot, now I just did it twice. Welcome to Be the Wolf. And today we're going to talk about what does it mean about you? And we're going to dive into some beliefs and some of those things that our mind does when we make things about us. And I am here with Allan Miles, and he's got quite a big story, and his mind made up some stories that about himself, and he's got some history around that. But he is a business owner, a husband, and a father. And I'm going to give the mic to you and let you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it's good to be here, all the way from across the pond in the UK. So I am absolutely a husband and father first. I have 5 children, married to my wife Becky, and I'm a business owner second. And I think that became a very conscious decision for me towards I'd say in the last 4 or 5 years. I was always very career focused and very business focused. And I work with businesses now and really help them when it comes to being able to get more attention, being able to then take that attention, turn it into leads and sales, and then understanding how to get repeat business through referrals and resigns. And that's the real focus for me at this point in business. My background is sales. I've worked in B2B sales for over 20 years and very much been on the forefront of building businesses that I've worked in before, and it being the main dominant factor in life. And hopefully, as we'll discover through the conversation today, my story kind of took me in a few different directions, which has led me to where I'm at this point.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how we all have our unique experiences, and they help to unfold what it is that we do in life. This is something I see over and over, and I think the people that end up in careers that they love, there is something about their story that led them to where they are today. So, let's dig in. Your story, or there's a pattern of losing people that started when you were really young. Why don't
Yeah.
you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when just before I was 5, I lost my dad in a road traffic accident. So to kind of paint the picture, it was one of those situations where we actually had a family business. We ran a guest house. So my mum and my dad ran that along with my dad also working as a postman, and he was called in to do some extra work on a night shift. So he said good night to me that night, and I woke up the next day and it will always stay with me. I remember waking up and my sister was stood at the door and my mum was knelt down in front of me, and I grew up in quite a rural area and there was a lot of sheep. So everyone had sheepskin rugs and that
Oh,
type of thing. So I stood on my sheepskin rug, which had one of the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles on it. I think it was Michelangelo. And I was stood on it, and my mum was knelt in front of me and held my hands and was like, "Daddy's gone to heaven." And for me, that was the first moment where I experienced loss, which is a young age. And
yeah.
I didn't talk for the rest of that day. Like from the moment I basically woke up, I just didn't say anything. And from all accounts, kind of speaking to people afterwards as I've grown up, it seemed like I wasn't really phased, but I obviously just became silent. I just didn't say anything. And I played with my toys and kind of in my mind, I kind of had come to this place where I was in denial quite quickly, and I stayed in that place for a very long time. I was adamant he was coming back, and even had an experience when I was about 10. So we're talking like 5 years later, where I saw a man playing with his kid who looked very similar to my dad. And I was like, oh my God, it's my dad. Like he's over there. Well, he's going to come and see me in a minute. Then obviously he must be undercover or something. I don't understand why, but it's him, definitely him. And then he walked off with that kid. And that I think was the start of it for me, where I started to understand he isn't coming back and that he is actually gone. And like that took I find that when young children, like especially myself, like when you lose somebody young, like you go through it in different waves. So
Yeah.
there's that initial very linear question of where did my dad go, and you seek some help and support to understand that. But then as you turn into a teenager, there's already enough questions about your life and the world and who you are as a teenager. But then the anger starts to show up of, why did my dad have to be taken? Like, what was the background? I need to know more. And I'm very much a data person. So I needed to essentially understand his whole life and understand why it happened. And ultimately, sometimes there is no reason why bad things happen to good people. They just do, because that's life.
Yeah.
And like, it's really about, for me, that was the start of a long line of losses, essentially, that shaped me into who I am. So it's a very, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Like loss, because you'd do anything to have the person back, but I wouldn't change my life for everything I've been through. Like it makes you who you are, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had my first big traumatic experience was with loss at 4 years old. And, I held the hand while this person slipped away. And, my mind blocked it out. So for you, that denial, especially when we're so young, we do not have big emotional resources and mental resources to really understand what has happened. And it's like our mind kind of helps protect us and only gives us enough really understanding that we can process. And then I think that experience when you saw the dad, like it was this metaphor of the dad walking away, was is very powerful to actually show you that understanding, like, oh wait, this is the thing that's happening. It's
Yeah.
so interesting how those things line up with the mind and help us to understand or give us more information that we can begin the next step of processing. And then of
Yeah.
course the anger. Yeah, you're right. Teenage years and anger. Totally. So it was the first big
Mhm.
one. And then tell me about the second one.
Yeah, so the second one was my mum. And that one, in honesty, probably hit me the hardest out of all of the losses. And to give a bit of context, obviously, growing up, having lost my dad at a young age, my mum became pretty much everything to me from a parental perspective. And I had a few step parents come in, and there were some relationships that didn't work. So male figures would kind of come and go in my life. So it was a case of my mum was both my mum and my dad, and I was very much wrapped in cotton wool. Especially looking back at it, I was the last child that she had, so obviously last child syndrome anyway. But there was then that extra special protection of kind of your dad's son, and you're all I have left of him. So I was very much wrapped in cotton wool and kept very close. Like the apron strings definitely weren't cut for a long time until I left home. I left home quite young because of that. I left home at 18, and moved to a completely different part of the country. My
Yeah.
mum, and I kept obviously stayed in very close contact with my mum. It'd be a daily conversation, speaking to her, making sure she's okay. Any good news, she'd be the first person I'd share it with.
I have a
And
quick question.
yeah,
That place of, the apron strings being held tight and, still, even after you left home, still talking to her a lot, making sure she's okay. What are the stories that you formulated about you during that time? Like, what did you make it mean about her overprotectiveness?
yeah. So I saw her kind of her overprotectiveness as just simply her trying to make sure nothing bad happened to me. I saw our relationship, and obviously I was the one who always had to mop up the tears when another man broke her heart and walked out and
Mhm.
left her or whatever. And as a young child growing up, like 7, 8, 9, 10, and then I have a step like father now, and he got the brunt of my teenage years, unfortunately, and the angst of everyone who ever hurt my mum. But me and him are on very good terms now. But it was a case of, up until that point, I saw myself as the protector in the house. So as a 7-year-old boy, you see your mum's heart get broken, so you try to protect her, like you try and take care of her. So I saw myself in that role, and there would be those evenings, and anyone who maybe grew up in a single parent household could maybe relate to this type of story of, my mum would be like, well, I kind of want to buy a chocolate. Would you mind running down to the corner shop to get me one? And like, I was young. I mean, we're in the 90s, so it was a different world to a degree. But
Right.
it was a case of, I'm afraid of the dark. Like, I don't want to go out in the dark. But it's like, there's this expectation now on me of, I don't want to disappoint my mum because she really wants a bar of chocolate. And I know that a good husband would take care of his wife, so he would make sure she has what she needs. It's that kind of linear thought process as a young child of making sure that the woman in the house is like feeling loved and taken care of, because that's in my mind. I was like, okay, like I need to make sure I take care of her and protect her. So I would run out into the night, and my heart would be beating at about 1,000,000 beats per second as I sprint to the shop to get to some artificial light, so you knew you weren't going to get captured by somebody,
Right.
to then run all the way home to make sure she had what she needed in that moment. And it was, for me, like those moments that I suppose really built our relationship. And even when I kind of moved out, I think that's where kind of that daily communication still existed, in that me and her had built a very unbreakable bond. And I think for me, I had 2 children at that point. So to me, she had lots of reasons to live. And unfortunately, she decided that she wanted to commit suicide. And the year leading up to her suicide, she had already tried to commit suicide and failed. And we had been through quite a traumatic experience, like her as well. Her health was deteriorating. And you can logically understand maybe why she got to the decision that she did. But for me, it was always thinking of the last conversation I had with her, which was literally just a few hours before she killed herself. And it was late that afternoon, and she basically snuck out from her home in the very early hours of the morning, when my stepdad was asleep. She took the car, drove down to the local dock, which was a symbolic place. It was where she had her first date with my dad,
Mm.
and she couldn't swim, and she jumped in. And thankfully, she banged her head on the way in, so she was unconscious pretty quickly. But it was the last conversation I had to her. She was very distant, and I said, like, normal conversation, like, "Hey, mum, how's it going?" She's like, "Fine." I was like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "Nothing." I was like, "Okay, been up to anything?" She's like, "No, just thinking." I was like, "What have you been thinking about?" And when you're really milking a conversation, trying to get
Right.
something from somebody, she was like, "Just stuff and things." I was like, "Any particular stuff and things?" She's like, "Nope." I was like, okay. And at that moment, I felt like something is off. Like, this isn't right. And I said, okay, well, I'll leave you to think about your stuff and things. Like, if you want to talk, you know where I am. And she went, "Love you lots, Allan." And then, like, that was our last conversation. I remember coming off the phone and being like, it was a really weird conversation. And then the next morning, I woke up to a phone call to say that she was missing. And then obviously a few hours later, we discovered what had happened. And it's, I think that for me was one of the first moments when you start to realize that people have 3 types of life. And I read this somewhere, I think it was from a CIA agent, was talking about when you're interviewing somebody, there's 3 types of personality that somebody has. They have their public persona that they show everybody, including strangers.
Right.
You have their personal persona, who they share with their very close circle. And then you have their secret life, which is really what we keep to ourselves most of the time, and maybe share it with like 1 or 2 people. And normally it's not even the whole persona, it's just small fragments of that persona. And I thought I knew my mum inside and out. Obviously, she's a grown woman who had her own story and her own life. And it was one of those moments where I think that she'd clearly planned this meticulously, for it to go like flawlessly in her, for how she wanted it to go. And I think that for me was the first moment that I learned that you never truly know what someone is thinking. And you have to make sure that you kind of leave it all out there. And if you have something to say, make sure you say it. Because the worst feeling I think that you can ever have is regret. Because if you lose somebody you love, there's no going back. You can't travel back in time. So for me, it's really about having the courage to always be authentically who you are. And if you want to tell somebody you care, then don't leave it till next time. If you have something that needs to be said, like never going to sleep on an argument, is a really important thing for me and my wife, to make sure that like we always end the night in a positive place, because I'm sure we will both wake up tomorrow, but there is no given.
Right. Well, and it's when we talk about this, the like secret internal life, and what most people don't realize is this is where we hold our shame, right? There's this place we don't want to share these things because we're afraid of what people will think. We're afraid of what people will do. We're afraid of what people will say. And this is where we make up these stories about ourselves. It's like you had that story internally. You were probably not telling everybody, I felt like I had to be the protector, but you had that internal story that you had to feel like you were the protector. And so if you did things that were in alignment with that persona or not, made you either feel good about yourself or not so good. And I'm guessing that story, that internal story, played a big role in how you felt after all of this happened with your mom. But you discovered some things about her internal story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So after she had passed away, I discovered that she had actually had an affair, when she was with my dad, and they were in kind of, from the evidence I could kind of find and the stories that I'd heard afterwards, that I'd been kind of removed from, and my mum had kind of put barriers in the way to stop me from ever finding out, because my dad had been put onto such a pedestal that for me to find, I think she was afraid that for me to find out what had happened and the actual truth of the matter, that they had a normal relationship, they didn't have a Disney relationship, and the reality is everyone did things that they probably regretted inside of that relationship, but they were trying to work through it. And when he died, they were kind of very much at the beginning of trying to work through it. And the person who my mum married quite quickly after my dad died was actually the person who she had had the affair with. And that relationship was an absolute car crash. It was horrific. And it not only was it too soon, but it was obviously a relationship born out of guilt. And it was something that, I suppose, in a roundabout way, trying to cobble together the shreds of what's left of, okay, I have to try and make something of this. And I can certainly empathize with her. But again, this is what taught me one of the other lessons that's really important to me, that honesty and transparency has to be the number one thing. However hard it is to be honest, if you're not, I saw this lie in particular eat her alive. And the very first time she tried to commit suicide, she was actually sectioned. And for anyone who has not been into or seen the mental health services that exist, and I think the UK have quite good facilities. It's not so we're in like some strange part of the world. We're in a
United
fairly
States.
you said that, not me. So it was a case of one of the treatments they provided her was electroshock therapy. And I heard this and I was like, you're going to do what? And they literally electrocuted her in an effort to restart and kind of like flatline her brain so that she would kind of reverse and go backwards from a mental perspective and go back to where she was. And amazingly, it actually worked for a while. But before that happened, I sat down with her when I heard that she had tried to take an overdose. I sat down with her and I said, like, what's going on? And she said, I've done something terrible. So, what have you done? And I sat in this room with her for over 2 hours. And she said the same thing to me over and over again. I've done something terrible. You'll never forgive me. And I would get her to the point of being like, so what is it? Like, whatever it is, we will get through it. And that protector in me came out again of, I have to help her fix this, whatever it is. And my brain's going like, has she like robbed a bank? Has she like killed somebody? Like, what's happened? And she would just go internal at that moment and have the rest of the conversation in her head. And it was obviously, well, from all you can presume, essentially, from the everything I read afterwards, was because of the fact that she had cheated on my dad. And obviously I wouldn't forget, she felt I wouldn't forgive her for doing that. I would have forgiven her in a heartbeat. But you can understand why she ended up in that headspace, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we talk about that internal persona and all of that self-talk and all those stories. So, that deterioration of somebody's mental health has so much to do with them feeling bad about themselves or something they've done. And, we are hardwired to need connection and love. And so when we start to make up stories about ourselves, like if somebody's not paying enough attention to us, or if we screw up, we decide that we're not good enough, that we're unforgivable, that we are, that early story of my loss where I held the hand while he lost his life or while he slipped away. I believed that that was my fault. I believed that the thing that I tried to do to stop it and failed, so was the reason why he lost his life. And so I created this persona of this internal persona that I was a murderer in my mind. And so I can definitely see how that story of doing something unforgivable can really eat away. And then you've got the story that you've got to be a protector. And then there's the other story of dad is infallible and
Mhm.
perfect, which I'm sure probably led to unconscious, unrealistic expectations about the kind of man you needed to
Yeah,
be.
massive.
And so all of these things, all of our experiences, we typically have this tendency to make up stories about what it means about us and what kind of person we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all of it plays into that narrative that is your own story, isn't it? And for me, I kind of spent a large part of my later teen years and early 20s, especially when I became a dad, thinking that I basically had to walk around apologizing for the male human race and
Mhm.
be that man that like women apparently wanted. And I struggled with my weight, especially growing up. My mum was, I suppose, a bit of a feeder, and I was an emotional eater. So in my early 20s, as I became, or approaching mid 20s, as I became a dad, I went on a big weight loss journey, lost about 110 pounds in weight, and have kept it off since, which was I suppose, one of the first big accomplishments that I had. But leading up to that point, I had this narrative that because I was uh, the fat kid, I suppose, if you want to put it bluntly like that. And I would generally get rejected by girls because I wasn't the typical 6 foot with abs. And most teenage girls, that's initially what they look for, especially in the UK. Like it became this thing that my 40s will be my moment to shine when people want somebody dependable because of what I had witnessed. And I was like, even at that young age, I was diagnosing my mum's relationships. And I was like, all this guy needed to do was just show up, care, and be consistent, and everything would have been fine. And they weren't, and they didn't. So in my head, I was like, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. And even if I have to go through 10 or 15 or 20 years of pain in my adult life of being rejected constantly, I'll get to my 40s and I will be a hot commodity. As it is, my dating life was fine, and I've been happily married for years. But it's that thing of the stories that you tell yourself, they become your identity. And even now, like I put the world on my back, and it's my responsibility to solve everything until I then sit down and go, okay, I have a toolbox of things here. I've learned that it doesn't have to just be my responsibility. My wife like will happily shoulder some of the burden and work through things with me. Like I don't have to fix the world's problems, but that becomes like an ingrained pattern of behavior. And I think that for me, something I'm always really passionate about helping people to understand, especially with their businesses, is that you are not your business. Like you are a separate entity from your business, and don't bring your emotional baggage into building a business, because essentially all you're going to do is give yourself a lot more headaches and a whole load of debt. Like you need to be able to keep those two things very separate and actually spend time working on yourself to get to that place. Because I think a lot of success or short-term success can be born out of pain, and you can use that energy very positively to create some success. But it's a bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing to me. Like that whole like work hard, play hard philosophy. I think it has merit to a degree, except for I see that people, myself included, and this is kind of learned from retrospection, of working yourself to this point of I will prove myself that I am the best at something, and you just work so hard that you achieve great success, but then you burn out.
Right.
And then you go through this continual cycle of recovering just enough from the burnout to work really hard again to then burn out. And you sit there and you're like, but I'm doing something good. Like I'm providing for my family and I'm building a legacy and I'm doing all these things. But actually it's a case of you're not dealing with your trauma. You're not dealing with your past. And for many people, I think that's what drives that initial success, instead of actually having a purpose that pulls you. You are using something that's pushing you. And the
Yeah.
whole time you're being pushed, there's only so far you can be pushed before you fall over again.
No, absolutely. And I mean, you said it in the beginning, you put husband and father before business owner. And I know, my own struggles of building a business. And right now I'm struggling with my marketing funnel. And it's that piece that, you have to catch yourself with those stories. Like you can't slide into what does this mean about me? It doesn't mean anything. It just means that my headline is not working, but it doesn't have anything to do with me. And if I slide into that place of, oh my God, the marketing's not working, that means I'm worthless and I'm like not good enough, and all of these stories that most people are running through their head in that secret persona all of the time, I'm not going to be able to move forward. I'm not going to be able to look at something objectively and say, okay, this is not working. So we try something different. Or I'm so attached and I want this to work that I'm going to keep like spending money on the ads and everything to see if it's going to work. So, when you're talking about business, when you're talking about career, your job is part of your identity, and it's where you get your value and your worth, like, right, that value of being the protector versus you are a man who is protective sometimes, but it's not who you are. Your wife can shoulder some of that responsibility. There's other forces at play that, that your children can be their own protectors as well.
Yeah.
But it's when we make up these stories about what these things mean about us, it really limits us in our personal life, our professional life, and especially if you own a business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that for me, kind of making that decision to start to prioritize family and like my wife above business came from my previous business. And I was, to give some context, like, I was actually fundamentally against marriage, as was my wife, in all honesty. Like I had obviously seen enough failed marriages to be like, well, the whole point of marriage is pointless. Like, what's just a waste of money. And I'd gone through relationship after relationship, but in an effort to still fulfill that role of being the Disney like knight in shining armor, I would be engaged. I would get my partner of the time to the point of being engaged, because I saw that as enough commitment to then just push the wedding off indefinitely. To then be like, so it was that middle ground of still trying to people please, still trying to like make sure that the relationship was as perfect as it probably should be in my mind, which is ridiculous in hindsight looking back. But then when I'd known my wife for a while as a friend, it wasn't until we came together, and she was genuinely the first person who ever wanted to be with me for who I am, not what I could provide. And that was the moment that things just started to change. Like it for me, it was the moment when I actually started to understand who I was as a person, and understand that I didn't always have to show up as a perfect 10. I didn't have to always be Prince Charming. I didn't always have to be like Gordon Gecko in the business sense. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, I could just be Allan, and I could be Allan with flaws, and that was okay. And that starts to build who you are. And I think that the moment I was able to start to live authentically was the moment, and the moment you know you have somebody in your corner is the moment that lots of different things start to fall in place. So we had built a very successful recruitment company. I'd spent most of my career in that industry, and we had an agency that was doing about $1.5 million a year. So it was a successful business. I hated the industry, but I had remained in it because I felt I couldn't do anything else that would earn the type of money I could earn by doing it. And I had that responsibility, that narrative again, of providing for my family. And I sat down with Becky, my wife, and I said, I really hate what I'm doing. Like, I'm having panic attacks at my desk every single day. Like, I despise the industry. I hate everything about it. Sorry to anyone from the recruitment industry if you're watching. I've come to peace with the industry now, but it was a case of I was kind of done. And she said to me words to the effect of, I don't care if we end up like homeless, I'll still be here. And I was like, we're not going to end up homeless. Like, I won't allow that to happen. But it allowed me to transition into a different vehicle. So, one of my little rocky moments was I had a business partner, and they were the finance partner to that business. So, we have a successful business that I should have come away with potentially a decent amount of money to be able to put in the bank from the years of work I put in. And essentially, I walked away with £49. And they sat down
Whoa.
and yeah, they sat down and said, so I was a 49% shareholder. They were the 51% shareholder. And they had first rights, as according to our contract, to rebuy my shares. And they basically said, okay, well, we'll give you your £49. And I think part of it was in an expectation that I would say, oh, don't worry, I'll just carry on. And I took the £49. I was like, I walked away from something that financially would have set me up for the rest of my life. But I knew, having also lost my brother, who essentially worked himself to death, I knew that I had to leave. So I took that £49 and I used it as the motivation to make sure everything else I did from that point was going to be successful, but successful in a way that allowed me to still prioritize the things that were important to me. And this business that I run now, it's taken a few different like disguises of kind of what we do and how we deliver it. And especially through COVID, obviously everything went remote at that point. We grew very quickly, and we grew to a point that I was working far too much. And that was the first moment that I'd seen some real growth in myself, that instead of people pleasing and instead of trying to just grind it out for another 15 years, I literally blew it apart and just burnt it to the ground and started again and said, this isn't what I'm trying to build. This is the wrong thing. This is not in alignment with my values now. Start again. And that's painful. Like, as a salesperson, turning away money, as a business owner, turning away money and essentially refunding people and being like, I'm not doing this. I'm sorry, but I'm not doing this. And then finding the second iteration, the third iteration, that fourth iteration of, okay, now we're getting there. Now we're in kind of alignment with what we really want to be doing. Now we're starting to get the balance, and it's a battle. And if you tie that to yourself as I'm a good human being or I'm a bad human being, it will
Right.
destroy you.
Right. One thing that I think is really important to bring up here for anybody that's trying to figure out, like, whatever your work situation is, whether you're working for a company or you're owning a business, when it's affecting your mental health on any kind of level, you're not in alignment with your values. And if you're not in alignment with your values, it's affecting your mental health, whether you realize it or not. So it will over time cause you to burn out. You're continuously trying, like you said earlier, trying to chase, trying to prove yourself, trying to fill those holes. And that's all to the end that you think that once you get to this certain place, then you can relax and you'll be okay, right? Generations before us just get to retirement and then you can enjoy your life, then you can relax. And they all ended up with, not feeling good, not actually having the energy to take advantage of their life. But what you said is so important about the iterations. Maybe that first try isn't going to work. So if you're switching jobs, maybe that first next job isn't going to work. Maybe it's a little better. And you can't, when you're not attached to what it means about you, you can say, okay, just like I was talking about with the marketing headline, it's like, there is that piece, like, is this working? What is working? What do I want to recreate? What is not working? And let's go to the next iteration, whether it's another job or another form of the business or another particular thing you're trying, or relationships even. But each step along the way, moving you closer to the type of life you want, and allowing you to, with each of those steps, starting to feed the better stories, like, oh, this wasn't as bad as the last one, so therefore I'm getting better at this. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm getting better. I'm in feeding those stories, I'm closer to where I want to be, and this is great. This means I'm improving. This means I'm becoming the person that I want to be, instead of, I'm a failure,
Mhm.
I'm a POS. But all of those things.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Of like, we live in a world, especially when it's driven by social media, of comparison of, am I doing as well as that person? Or if you're a business owner and you run something on through social media, it's like, this post did terribly. It only got 300 views. And I think, well, you have to put that into perspective of, yes, there's somebody out there right now getting millions of views. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be striving to optimize and maximize what we do, but let's just put that into context for a second. If you had flyers and you dropped off 300 flyers and everybody who looked at, like, everyone you delivered it to looked at it, you've got 300 eyeballs. You'd be pretty happy with that. Like, you'd be like, everyone I sent that flyer to looked at it, and we've got this post, this social media post, it's got 300 views. Let's put those 300 people in one place. Like, you're talking to a camera, giving them 60 seconds of value. 300 people bothered to show up to take a look at it. And if you filled a room with 300 people, you'd be like, I just spoke to 300 people. You'd be quite happy with that, unless you're used to speaking to audiences of 15,000. But it's about really being able to start to put perspective on things. And instead of, and it's easier said than done, definitely, I can definitely testify to this, but it's much more important to compare yourself against yourself than against people around you. And I think it's one of the things we see a lot with our clients, especially when we get a lot of referrals, is, well, how is this person doing? Like, well, I heard this person's doing X. Shouldn't I be doing that too? And it's like, well, no, because you're trying to build a completely different business to them. So why would you want to do the same thing that they're doing? Like, it's got to be unique to you. And it's, sometimes you need to care more about your grass and like your walls than your neighbors, because until your grass is in order and you're happy with your grass, and you might be happy with nearly dead grass, like, you might be happy with dirt. Let's just be honest. Like, if you're happy with the dirt, but it doesn't matter that it's not green, paint it green. Do you know what I mean? It's that thing of understanding, what do you want? And I think that a lot of the comparison and a lot of the self-judgment comes from a place of actually not being able to accurately be able to answer the question of, what do I want? And I
Yeah.
think that there's a real lack of certainty around that. There's some vague answer of I want a successful business or I want
I
a
want to be
nice.
happy.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to
Prime
be
one.
happy. I have to, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
I just have to say this because everybody says, I just want to be happy. And I'm going to tell you that 99% of the people that say that, what they're really saying is, I want to be out of pain.
yeah. Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that. And have spent a long time in that pursuit of happiness and trying to find that kind of place of I will be happy when, and like you say, like when X happens. And it wasn't until I really kind of did a bit of study and I started to break it down and understand that I was approaching it wrong. And for me, happiness is the outcome from having three other things in line. So you have health, and I think health, personal health, is massively neglected. And this is like physical health, mental health, and really making sure that you start your day. So I have a kind of like my own daily process that I prioritize health first of all. And you don't have to go to the gym first thing in the morning. You can do a million different things. For me, this is what works. I wake up and I go to the gym and I get a workout in and I make sure that I learn something new. So I get a chance to detox away from social media because I work on social media. So watch something valuable, listen to something valuable, read something valuable, one or the other. And at that point, I get my day started, plan my day out, make sure I'm feeling good, make sure like some days it will be I'll do some priming, other days I'll take a cold shower, some days I'll just work out and I'll feel fine. But it's about checking in with myself and saying like, how are you today? Like, are you feeling good and ready to go? And then knowing that you're ready to start your day. So that's then your health taken care of from like that macro perspective. Then it's about looking at wealth. And I think sometimes, and I've gone in either direction at points, like we have to accept you need money. Like you have to have money to really be able to live. There's no way around this. Like, so we can dress it up however we want. We don't all need to be billionaires, but none of us really want to be completely broke, that we have nothing. We're constantly worried about money. We need to have a vehicle that produces enough wealth to be able to, at the very least, live day to day happily and comfortably, like from a perspective of we're taken care of. So now we've taken care of health and wealth. The next one is relationships. And that's when you make sure that in your day, and the actual percentages of your day that you spend doing each one of these things will fluctuate. Like balance is not like carving this up equally every single day. Some days it's going to be more skewed in one direction. A weekend is a prime example. You might decide that I don't look at wealth particularly on the weekend, so only 5 or 10% of your energy is dedicated to that. But for relationships, 80% of it goes to that side of things. This is where you have that connection with potentially a partner, maybe your children, if nothing else, your friends, but also having a relationship with yourself and being comfortable on your own and in your own skin instead of always needing to be distracted. And
Right.
once you have health, wealth, and relationships, those three things together, that equals happiness, or I tend to think of it more a bit like joy. And that's that feeling of, the only way I've ever been able to describe that feeling is it's almost like a feeling of inner calm, like you're in the eye of a hurricane and everything around you is complete craziness, but you in your life and in yourself, you're at peace and you're like, I feel good. Like I could stay in this spot forever. And it's inevitable that there's going to be points when the rest of that storm is going to blow through, and then you're going to get to another eye of the storm. And I think it's a unrealistic goal to get to that place once and stay there forever. Maybe that's a limiting belief, I don't know, but I believe that life is about ebbs and flows, and it's about understanding that if you have those core tenets in place and you stick to those processes, whether it's a good day or a bad day, then you will always come back to that place of having inner peace and being at peace with yourself. And that to me is how I've got to the place of joy and abundance. And like you go through seasons in life, but that's how I can kind of quantify it, of how I would go out and attack it, and that's how I have attacked it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, how do, well, real quick, I think my place of happiness is the feeling of expansion inside
Mhm.
of me. So that place of peace, that inner peace, so to speak, where I feel like the calm eye of the storm, for me, it just feels open and expansive. It's like there's nothing coming down or like contracting in on me. And so I always tell like my clients, like when they're struggling with a decision, what should I do? What should I do? I don't know. Well, what is the thing that's going to make you feel open and expansive in a week? Like not right now. Sometimes we got to like push through some stuff that's a little hard when we make a decision, but what's going to make you feel proud of yourself and have that open, expansive feeling next week? And those, I've always used that as a good decision guide mechanism. So, Allan, how is it that people find you? How is it that they work with you? What did they have? I'm going to ask you one more question at the end of this. Maybe I'll ask you two.
Okay.
And yeah, how do people get in touch with you? How do they work with you?
Yeah, best thing to do, if you head to the website, allanmiles.com, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook as well. Feel free to follow me. We're always pumping out free value there. The website has links to everything. Just make sure you spell my name correctly. So it's ALLAN and then miles, like the distance.com. So it's pretty straightforward. On there, you'll see examples of the people we've worked with, how we help them with their business, and then you can book in a free call. Unlike most free calls out there, I do just like to caveat this. It isn't a guise of a sales call. It's genuine. It's called a value call because it's focused on value and really making sure that we can understand what you do, what you're struggling with, and then make sure we provide you with some solutions to go and implement them. It's only at that point, once we can see you're somebody who is in alignment with what we do and how we do it, and we can see that you actually do take action on things, that we would even look at potentially doing something from a working perspective. We really prioritize that value. And for me, it's about give until I'm asked. We don't try and swing around to a sales call as quickly as possible. That's just not how we do things. So if you're struggling with your business right now, or you're considering launching a business, take a look at the website. If it sounds like something that may be of interest to you, let's arrange time to have a chat, and let's see what happens from there.
And so I do have two questions for you, Allan. First, why do you do what you do? Why do you work with business owners to help them?
So for me, it's simply a case of it's just the thing I love to do. And I think it's something that you see when somebody has a real passion for something. And like for a lot of people, the thought of sitting there and like looking at lots of data inside of a business and pulling it apart and putting it back into a new sequence would bore them to death. For me, that's my playground. It's the thing that I love to do. And the reason I like to work with smaller businesses as opposed to large corporations and companies is that you can make an impact into someone's life. Helping a small business to really grow by 10 or 20% can be life changing. Helping somebody to launch a business can be life changing. Whereas adding 500,000 to, or even 10 million to a large company, it's just some more money that will be paid out in a dividend and they don't really care. So for me, it's really about just zoning in on the place that I just love to be.
Wonderful. And so, you know, that place where you were working your butt off and you were doing well financially, but you were in that place, I think so many people can relate to, where it's like the money has to be the driver. I have to, like, that's going to be the thing that's going to drive my business, drive my decisions, drive what I do for a living. When you look back at the man you were at that point in time, when you were still in that headspace, what advice would you give him?
So it's a good question. I think the advice that I would give to old Allan would be take the leap, but take a leap and have belief in yourself, but in a way that provides you a runway. So you don't have to always make changes in a radical way that is heroic and looks like something from a Hollywood film. Like actually the pragmatic understanding of, look, you have financial obligations and responsibilities. And yes, there are lots of people who have rags to riches stories. But that's when we get to look at that story from the big macro perspective of, wow, they made it. That's amazing. The actual moments in there that would have been such high pressure that probably broke 99 people out of the 100, and they were just that one that made it through. Instead, I believe that the advice I would give to myself would be create a plan that's not idealistic, it's realistic, and allow yourself to explore new opportunities. Understand that money isn't everything. Sometimes you have to give something to get something, but always make sure that those core fundamentals are taken care of, because that's the thing that if things start to go wrong, like, you will immediately just default back to old beliefs and old behavior and go, see, I knew it. That's the validation I needed to show that I should have just stayed with what I was doing. But the reality is you just didn't plan very well. It's like going out for a walk without a coat, and then it starts to rain and you go, well, see, I knew it was going to rain. Then why didn't you wear a coat? Like, make some better preparations. If you have a solid plan, you can achieve anything that you want to. And I think that's the advice that I would really give to myself. I'm somebody who learns through through feedback. So if I was going to fall off a cliff, I'm going to hit every single rock on the way down, and I'm going to feel every single bump. So if I can help anyone with anything, it's a case of make sure you create a long enough runway so that that jumbo jet has plenty of space to take off, and you can create the life that you want. Start by just dipping your toe in the water, and then build on that consistently. It's going to be effort, but that's how I would do it. And that's what the advice I would give to myself.
Yeah. One of the things I hear in that is take a deep breath, take one small step at a time, and you'll get there.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, actually, I love to look at people who have been successful. So people like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, like business owners, those types of things. And you can start to tie together like a list of traits and qualities. One of the things that they all do really well is understanding to take one step at a time. But I think it goes deeper than that. It's about being able to be present in the moment of, we're in a high pressure moment right now. So one step at a time is not just doing one tiny thing. It's actually a monumental moment, but I'm not going to allow any of the exterior noise impact what I have to do right now. It's about being able to just be present and go, I have to show up as my best self. And this might be the biggest moment in my life right now, but I'm not going to let the fact that I had an argument with somebody in the car park, or that I didn't sleep very well last night, or whatever the reason or excuse might be, I'm not going to let any of that bother me. I'm just going to zone in on that moment. And that's what you see over and over again with super high achievers. And it's I think the like the normal person's way to have those highlight reel moments and really make sure they move towards their full potential.
Yeah. And a piece of that really is what you were talking about, right? That being able to be the eye of the storm in that place, that, there might be all this chaos going on, but you can still hold that peace within yourself so that you can take the next best step instead of spiraling into those stories that people tell about themselves, about how they're maybe not the greatest. But you all are the greatest. You all have the potential to make it happen. So thank you, Allan, for sharing your story, your wisdom. I really appreciate you. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, that's the thing. And remember, everybody, that when you feel good about who you are and what you do, you help to elevate and evolve humanity. So I will see you all next time on Be the Wolf. Thank you again, Allan, for being here.